In the early 1972 in California, young women began disappearing along quiet roads and highways.
And many of them were last seen accepting rides from someone they believed was safe.
The man who picked them up did not look threatening and spoke calmly,
which made it easier for victims to trust him and get into his car without hesitation.
He drove long distances and kept conversations normal and controlled.
And nothing about his behavior in those moments suggested immediate danger. But once he reached isolated areas, the situation changed completely. And the victims had no way to escape or call for help.
The disappearances continued over time, and investigators struggled to connect the cases because the locations were spread out.
And the victims did not all share the same background.
However, there was one pattern that slowly became clear, which was that the victims were often traveling alone and had been picked up by someone offering a ride.
The killer understood how to appear harmless and used that to his advantage.
And he avoided drawing attention to himself by blending into normal daily life and maintaining a routine that did not raise suspicion among people who knew him.
As more reports came in, families demanded answers, and pressure increased on law enforcement to find the person responsible. Investigators began collecting witness statements and analyzing timelines, but the lack of direct evidence made the process slow and difficult.
At certain moments, there were leads that seemed promising, but none of them resulted in an arrest. And the case remained open while the number of victims continued to grow.
The killer adapted his behavior and became more careful with each incident, which made it harder to track his movements.
During this period, the fear among the public increased, and many people changed their routines and avoided traveling alone, especially at night. The idea that someone could appear normal
and still be responsible for multiple disappearances created a constant sense of unease.
Eventually, investigators identified a suspect who had been mentioned in earlier reports,
and they began to look more closely at his history and behavior.
He had a record of violence and had previously been involved in serious incidents,
but had managed to return to normal life without long-term consequences.
His name was Ed Kemper, and he lived a life that did not immediately reveal the extent of what he had done. He was known for being intelligent and calm, and he interacted with people in a way that did not raise suspicion. As investigators gathered more information, they realized that he had knowledge of police procedures
and understood how investigations worked, which allowed him to avoid mistakes that could lead to his capture.
This made the case even more complex because he was not acting impulsively, but with awareness and control.
The turning point came when he made a decision that changed everything
and brought the investigation directly to him instead of being discovered through evidence alone.
He contacted authorities himself and admitted to what he had done.
When he was taken into custody, he began describing the crimes in detail
and explained how he selected victims and how he approached them without causing fear at first.
His statements matched the evidence that had been collected over time and confirmed his involvement.
He described how he used conversation and a calm presence to gain trust,
and how quickly the situation would change once the victims were isolated.
The level of control he described showed that each act was planned rather than spontaneous.
Investigators verified his statements and connected them to multiple cases that had remained unsolved.
And the full scope of his actions became clear as more information was reviewed. The number of victims and the timeline of events revealed a pattern that had gone undetected for longer than expected.
During the legal process, the evidence was presented, and the connection between him and the victims
was established through both physical findings and his own admissions.
There was no uncertainty about his responsibility for the crimes.
He remained calm during questioning and did not react emotionally in the way many expected,
which added another layer to how the case was perceived.
His ability to describe events without visible distress stood out to those involved in the investigation. The case concluded with a sentence that ensured he would not be released.
And the investigation that had lasted for years finally came to an end.
However, the impact of what had happened continued to affect the community and those connected to the victims.
The events demonstrated how someone could maintain a normal appearance while committing repeated crimes over time,
and how difficult it can be to identify such a person without clear evidence.
The lessons from the case influenced how future investigations were conducted and how patterns were recognized.